So my eyes around my neighbors, I'm a rock star. Foreign car, foreign bride, oh my god.
Mnemosyne, her name meaning memory, was the personification of memory. She shared 9 nights of passion with Zeus, and sometime later, she gave birth to the 9 Muses, patron goddesses of the arts. 9 goddesses who filled humanity with artistic inspiration. Springs from which people who consulted the oracle had to drink. One was the spring of forgetfulness, Lethe, and the other was the spring of memory, Mnemosyne. At number 6, the personification of the principal river of the underworld, Pallas sired Zealous, emulation, Nike, victory, Kratos, strength, and Bia, force. And from a union with Asteria, whom we briefly discussed earlier, Perseus sired Hector. Hyperion was a solar deity and thus was identified with his son Helios, and later with Apollo. His consort was Thea, Selene, the moon, Helios, the sun, and Eos, the dawn. Thea was also, like many of the 12 first-generation Titans, almost nothing is known about Thea. Though she's a goddess, she seems to almost exclusively exist as the mechanism of creation for children more important to Greek mythology than the Titans' rage. Neither Oceanus or Tethys allied themselves with either side, remaining neutral, and during this time, at the behest of Rhea, they took Hera in, keeping her safe. According to one source, this kindness was later repaid when Hera helped Oceanus and Tethys work through some marital issues, allowing them to reconcile and remain together. And that's it for this video. If you enjoyed the content, please like and subscribe.
Move all the world, what up? Shout out to my sisters.
Japanese were desperate for food and were shipping it from nearby Korea and China in sampans, the familiar wooden sailing ships of Asia. On the way, Japanese guards shot, stabbed, and beat to death men who dared to drink out of streams and wells. Those who fell down from sickness, weakness, or injury, the aircraft from the USS Hornet into Manila from December 13th to 15th and was sunk in Subic Bay, Philippines. 270 people died in the attack, the majority of them were U.S. prisoners, though there were many Japanese civilians in crew cabins. On the January 4,200 Asian laborers and 2,300 POWs were crammed into the holds and were being transported from one place in the vast Indonesian archipelago to another. On the Janyo Maru, 4,200 Asian laborers and 2,300 POWs were crammed into the holds and were being transported from one place in the vast Indonesian archipelago to another when the British submarine HMS Tradewind slammed 2 torpedoes into her. Over 5,500 of the prisoners went down with the ship. 674 POWs were rescued by the Japanese. Of those, 8 died en route to the hospital. The men on the Janyo Maru who were rescued were fortunate. In many of the hell ship sinkings, rescuing Japanese ships or crewmen about, lifeboats opened fire and killed survivors bobbing in the sea. In at least one case, that of the US submarine Wahoo, POWs were killed by fire from deck guns of Allied ships. In the case of the Wahoo, the men in the lifeboats and in the sea were mostly Indian, and in the smoke and confusion of battle, the men aboard the Wahoo mistook them for Japanese sailors, who often waited for rescuing Allied ships to come close before they opened fire on them or blew themselves up. Many of the officers and men who were on the ships that mistakenly sunk Japanese boats filled with prisoners suffered from PTSD for the rest of their lives. Many, upon rescuing their own men at sea, begged their forgiveness on hands and knees, repeatedly crying, "We didn't know, we didn't know." Hell ships, literal hell.
The prisoners who had managed to thrive in the gulags, whether it was through exploitation, through offering of stockpiled food or clothes, or through violence, such assaults were commonplace. Some of the work work projects undertaken by the Gulag laborers were truly horrific to endure. Perhaps one of the most impressive and most disturbing was the construction of the White Sea-Baltic Canal, stretching over 140 miles from the White Sea in the far north of Russia, all the way to the Gulf of Finland at the eastern edge of the Baltic Sea. Construction started in 1931 and was completed in 1933. It had long been a pipe dream for many previous Russian rulers to build such a canal, though the cost of feasibility meant it was never attempted. Stalin sought to prove the technological and manpower might of the Soviet Union through the completion of this task. It was to be completed without any foreign assistance or materials. Around 170,000 prisoners were drafted to build the canal, with engineers and architects detained to oversee and plan the works. The work was done by hand, using no machinery. Food for the prisoners was allocated based on whether they had fulfilled their work quota for the day, with the full ration being 3 ounces of meat and 2 pounds of bread. For those who fell ill, half as much would be given. But for those who failed to meet the standard expected, less than half would be given. This process doomed those who could not keep up to be starved and worked to death.
If you're an imminent threat for your life, you can use deadly force. Other than screaming and shouting and she was afraid, that's why she shot her through the door. Surveillance evidence and eyewitness testimony has since refuted that. And that's what led the sheriff's department to arrest her early this morning.